As you might have noticed, when President Barack Obama was in Israel, suddenly Prime Minister Netanyahu said that he apologized to Turkey concerning what's happened on the Marmara ship. How do you read all these developments?
There is a clear and obvious question in such a situation. The same person, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, was Prime Minister when the Marmara massacre took place 3 years ago. He is still Prime Minister today. Why didn't he apologize during these past years? What has changed? Erdogan is the same, Netanyahu is the same. What has changed is the situation in Syria. This confirms very clearly and precisely that there is a Turkish-Israeli agreement over the situation in Syria. This also confirms that Erdogan is now in alliance with Israel in order to aggravate the situation in Syria. Erdogan failed in the past 2 years to achieve his objectives in mobilizing Turkish public opinion concerning Syria to his satisfaction, and he also failed in achieving the collapse of the Syrian state. Syria was steadfast despite the ferocious battles. He had no ally to help him except Israel, and Israel is our obvious enemy, which occupies our land. I believe that this is a clear indicator of the alliance between them. At the same time, maybe this apology also helps Erdogan to restore some of his status and credibility which he had lost inside Turkey.
I want to pick up on something which happened in the recent past. There has been a meeting between Erdogan and Öcalan on March 21st. During that meeting, the two sides talked about the formation of a new Middle East consisting of Arabs, Assyrians, Kurds, and Turks. Have you followed these meetings and statements?
What we have at the moment is the information available through the media. We have not received official details from any party as of yet. Since the initial steps taken in Turkey a few years ago to solve the Kurdish problem, our declared position has been to support any solution between the Turks and the Kurds, because we do not want to see more bloodshed in Turkey, which will no doubt have a negative impact on the region. Any genuine solution in this direction has our support, because the Kurdish people are a natural part of the fabric of the region. They are not guests or new immigrants. They have been living in these lands for centuries, for thousands of years. But the vision for the solution of the Turkish-Kurdish relations depends on the credibility of Erdogan. I do not trust this person. I doubt that he will fulfill his promises. All the steps he is taking are temporary measures aimed at winning him political support. Here, again, we ask the same question. Why didn't he take the same steps a few years ago? Again, this is related to the Syrian situation. But let's not prejudge the situation. Let's wait and see.
You said that finding a solution to the Kurdish problem is one of the important issues for the region. Can we hear from Your Excellency a broader vision about how we can solve this issue?
We need to be clear. Nationalism is different from ethnicity. We live in a mixed region. The fact that you're Turkish doesn't mean that you can't be Kurdish or Armenian or Arab in origin, with your own culture and language. This is the situation in Turkey, as well as in Syria. When I say Arab, it's not necessarily linked to an Arab ethnicity or race. Both nationalisms, Turkish and Arab, exemplify highly civilized and all-encompassing nationalistic models that are meant to be inclusive of everybody. The problem with this concept in the past was perhaps that the adopted mentality was one of rejecting and eliminating other cultures. I believe that the most beautiful aspect of this region is its diversity, and the most dangerous aspect is for us not to see this diversity as enriching and empowering. When we regard it as a weakness, we invite foreign forces to play us against each other and create conflicts. This was the case at the beginning of the last century, when the conflict started between the Arabs and the Turks during the final days of the Ottoman Empire. Many of the Arab nationalistic groups wanted Arab nationalism within the Ottoman Empire. However, things moved towards conflict as a result of mistakes made by both the Turks and the Arabs, as well as the result of intervention from foreign players. That's why we need to look at the situation today in the same way. We are made from the same fabric, weaved from many different colors.
Mr. President, one of the most important issues being discussed currently in Turkey is the question of the PKK. There are discussions about organizations operating on Syrian territories which are cooperating with the PKK and that the PKK has great influence over these organizations. They say that this organization is interested in creating a military vacuum in northern Syria so that it can be filled by these new Kurdish forces. How do you read all these reports, Mr. President?
When there is chaos in any state, as is the case in Syria at the moment, certain groups are bound to appear in order to fill the vacuum created. Sometimes these groups are gangs with the only purpose of killing and stealing. Sometimes these are political groups, and other times they might be parties with certain policies. There's no doubt that there are some groups which seek separation. They exist in Syria, Turkey, Iraq, and other places. But we cannot generalize this situation to include all Kurds based on the agenda of small groups. Most Kurds are patriotic people who want to live in Syria, so the emergence of certain cases should not lead us to generalize the situation, or even to assume that things are moving towards separation. Separation needs a certain environment, be it widespread public support or external factors, which is very different from the circumstances prevailing in Syria at the moment. I'm not concerned about this issue at the moment.
في سوريا. أنا لست قلقا من هذه النقطة الآن.
Tam da bu noktada bir soru sormak istiyorum. Mart 2011'den.
Mr. President, this is a very important issue. Since the beginning of the events in Syria, certain parties and research centers started to talk about a new project involving the separation of northern Syria, northern Iraq, and southeastern Turkey, and separating these regions from their central states. Do you think there is a danger of northern Syria separating from the central state?
Oluşturacak bir devletçik riski görüyor musunuz? Taşıyor musunuz bu riski?
As I said, the current circumstances in Syria are not conducive in this respect, particularly in terms of public opinion at large. This notion of separation is completely rejected by the Syrian people and the Syrian state. No sovereign state accepts for part of its territory to be cut out or separated from its mainland. This position is categorically unacceptable and is not subject to any discussions with us in Syria.
Based on our questions and your answers, there seems to be a clear plan put forward by Western countries in cooperation and coordination with some regional countries to create a greater Kurdistan by separating northern Iraq, western Iran, northern Syria, and southeastern Turkey. They seemed determined to achieve this goal. Are we moving in the direction of achieving this goal?
لا أعتقد بأن الدول الأربعة المعنية أي سوريا، تركيا.
I do not believe that the four states in question, Syria, Turkey, Iran and Iraq, would agree to this proposition. Independent states in today's world seek integration rather than separation. Unfortunately, our region is an exception, which is a sign of backwardness. Today, large countries come together, the BRICS being an example. States seek to come together and form larger blocs because this is a requirement in the age we live in. So why would we go in the opposite direction in our region and seek fragmentation? What is there to prevent people who belong to different nationalities, ethnicities, religions and sects to live with each other? Therefore, if we accept the notion of separation, then this means we have to live with the consequences, namely fragmentation into small mini-states based on ethnicities and sects in an area that's extremely rich in its diversity. This creates a dangerous situation that would precipitate wars in the future. This is why I don't think that this is a sound proposition. Every one of these four concerned states should do its utmost to make sure all its people feel that they are first-class citizens with equal stakes in their state. This solution is therefore clear and simple. On the other hand, when a citizen feels he is second or third class, he is bound to think of separation or even act against his own state.
Mr. President, you used to have an interesting project. You talked about the political and economic unification of the 5 seas and the countries lying among these seas. How can we benefit from such a project? Can you please explain that to the Turkish audience?
Bunun koşulları var mı? Nasıl hayata geçirilecek bu proje?
هذا ما كنت أقصد به بأن الآن بهذا العصر.
This is what I meant when I said that in this age we need to unify. This doesn't mean becoming a single state in the same way that old states existed in the past, in large extended empires. Today we can unify through our interests at least. For instance, we can build railways, different forms of land transport, gas, oil, electricity, and all forms of energy, hence creating networks between our countries in this extremely strategic region of the world which lies between the 5 seas. This in itself will bring a lot of investment into the region, creating a great deal of prosperity and making these states and their people strong enough to face any foreign intervention. This vision needs will and independent decision-making, especially since many Western states have no interest in the creation of such projects in the Middle East. This also needs security and stability. I don't believe that the right conditions exist now for such a project, because there are many problems in Syria, in Lebanon, unrest in Iraq, most of which are a result of Western intervention. There is a government in Turkey which I do not consider to be independent, or to have such a vision, and Turkey is essential for this project due to its strategic position. This doesn't mean that we should cancel this project. It should remain in our minds, but the future of this region depends on grand projects like this. If we each remain confined within our national borders, we will be considered small on a global scale, even large countries such as Turkey and Iran. We cannot be powerful unless we create such strategic trans-border projects.
الاستراتيجية العابرة للحدود.
Sayın Başkan, şimdi bu biraz önceki soruya verdiğiniz...
Mr. President, based on your answer to my question, I want to move to another issue which is related to a sectarian war. There seems to be a Sunni-Shiite war going on in the region, and many people are talking about this. Do you see these conflicts as sectarian by nature?
Sizin görüş açınızdan nedir?
هذا الموضوع بدأ طرحه في عام 1979 على خلفية.
This issue was first raised in 1979 on the backdrop of the Iranian Revolution, which removed one of America's most important allies in the region. The only solution was to portray that revolution as a Shiite revolution, and the other sects should oppose it. On those grounds, the Iraq War against Iran was invented and supported by some Gulf countries. A short while later, the Muslim Brotherhoods in Syria were used for the same objective, in order to create sectarian strife. They failed in the first and the second attempt. Now, 3 decades later, there's no other choice but to create sectarian strife within these countries. That's why they have raised this issue again, and the slogans chanted, particularly in the early days of the crisis, were sectarian in their substance. So far they have failed. Had they succeeded, the whole region would have been fragmented as a result of this conflict. The positive aspect in all of this is the increasing public awareness against sectarian ideologies, despite the fact that there are some sectarian pockets which reflect an underlying ignorance, which is usually present in every society. I believe that the essence of the conflict now is not sectarian. The conflict is between forces and states seeking to take their people back into historic times, and between states wanting to take their peoples into a prosperous future. It's a conflict between those who want their homeland and their state to be independent from the West, and between those who seek to be satellites of Western powers only to achieve particular interests. At the same time, these forces are part of an international struggle of conflicting interests of which Turkey and Syria are a part. This struggle has been affected by different factors which might lead to the fragmentation of the region, enabling global powers to control our destiny and future.
وتجعل هذه القوى العظمى قادرة أكثر على أن تلعب بمصيرنا ومستقبلنا.
Nevertheless, outside Syria, in some countries, policies of division and fragmentation based on ethnicities and sects are being officially adopted. On the other hand, we lived and witnessed what you have been talking about in Turkey, particularly after the secular republic was created and led by Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. Unfortunately, however, these states and governments have distanced themselves from this project and started to adopt religious and sectarian projects. How do you see the future of these political systems?
These political systems and establishments which are seeking division and fragmentation are preparing for wars which might last for centuries rather than decades in our region, destroying everything, preventing development and prosperity, and taking us back to life in the Middle Ages. This is very dangerous. When I refer to secularism, I'm speaking about the freedom of religions and religious practices. Our region is primarily conservative. Most people are religious, and they should have the freedom to practice their religious rituals. We shouldn't think for a moment that there is a contradiction between ethnicities and religions. This is the essence of our thinking about secularism. This is why we should always aim to unify the people in our region. As I mentioned earlier, no matter what happens between the governments in Syria and Turkey, it should not affect the relations between the peoples of our countries, which constitutes the only guarantee for our unity as diverse and rich societies.
توحدنا كمجتمعات متنوعة وغنية.
Sayın Başkan, Suriye'yi
Mr. President, do you follow closely the developments in Turkey?
ilişkin bir gözleminizi, değerlendirmenizi alabilir miyiz?
هذا طبيعي.
This is in keeping with the norm, because what happens within Turkey, as both a neighboring and large country with its strategic position, will reflect directly on what happens inside Syria. At the same time, there are so many similarities. The nature of the people, their emotions, and the makeup of the social fabric in Turkey are very similar to those in Syria. So again, what happens in Turkey will have an impact on Syria. That's why we believe that stability in Turkey is in our best interest, and vice versa. If you have turbulences, we will be affected. The challenge is how to convince the Turkish officials and the current government, particularly the Prime Minister, that the fire in Syria will burn in Turkey. Unfortunately, he doesn't see this reality.
تركيا هو لا يرى هذه الحقيقة مع كل أسف.
Daha uzun yapmak isterdik. Özellikle
Concerning dialogue with the opposition, you called for a political solution and for direct dialogue with the opposition. Are there red lines for this dialogue?
bu konuda kırmızı çizgileriniz nedir? Onu tekrar sizden duymak isteriz.
الخطوط الحمراء هي
The red lines are foreign intervention. Any dialogue should be a Syrian dialogue only. No foreign intervention is allowed in this dialogue. Other than this, there are no red lines. Syrian citizens can discuss anything they want, because Syria is the homeland for all Syrians, and they can discuss anything they want. There are no red lines.
لا يوجد أي خطوط حمراء.
Bu mezhep
In the framework of a sectarian conflict, there are claims which appear on TV stations and some other media outlets to the effect that Syria is ruled by a dictatorial Alawite regime whose only objective is to eliminate the Sunnah. And even the assassination of Muhammad Said Ramadan al-Bouti comes within this effect. What is your response to such claims?
gerçek durum. Yani Suriye'de bir dinler mezhepler savaşı mı yaşanıyor?
طبعا بالنسبة لي هذه المنطقة كما تحدثنا قبل قليل هي منطقة.
I referred at the beginning to the diversity of this region, of which Syria is a part, and has been living in stability for many decades without any internal problems. How can it be stable without a government that constitutes a mirror image of its people? When a government in any country is dominated by one or more groups of people, and is therefore not reflective of the whole population, it cannot survive. It will either fall in no time, or the country as a whole will fall. These claims are therefore not true. We have been living together in this country for hundreds of years, and the government has always reflected the diversity of the people and their participation in its affairs. As for the late Dr. al-Bouti, it's ridiculous to accuse the Syrian government of his assassination. This accusation has been made by the same groups who were accusing him only days and weeks before of being the mouthpiece of the authorities on religious affairs. This was done in order to marginalize his popularity amongst the Syrian people and his followers in the Muslim world. In fact, he was not a mouthpiece for the authorities as they describe him. He never sought any kind of authority. He never wanted to be a minister or a mufti. He never asked for any money. He used to live a simple life. His only fault was that he was at the forefront of a group of religious leaders who stood decisively in the face of the plot to create sectarian strife amongst Syrians. Dr. al-Bouti was at the forefront, firstly because of his status in Syria and the Muslim world, and secondly because of his deep awareness and understanding of the truth of what was happening. There is no doubt that the stances of these religious leaders, and among them Dr. al-Bouti, was crucial in foiling this attempt to create sectarian strife. This is why they assassinated Dr. al-Bouti. as well as other religious leaders, one as recently as a few days ago in Aleppo. Everybody who knows about true religion, about tolerance and moderation in religion was targeted from the beginning of the crisis. No doubt, Dr. El-Bouti had the greatest effect when confronting this war. He didn't stand with the state, he stood with his nation, and therefore paid the price with his life. In any case, he always spoke of his readiness for martyrdom.
فلذلك دفع حياته ثمنا وهو كان بكل الأحوال يتحدث دائما عن استعداده للشهادة.
Sayın Beşar Esad, ulusal kanalı kabul ettiğiniz.
Thank you, Mr. President, for granting this interview to al-Assad TV station. Finally, Mr. President, is there anything else you want to say to the Turkish people?
نحن اليوم نمر في مرحلة مفصلية. نحن وأنتم والمنطقة لا أقصد سوريا.
We are now at a crucial juncture in history. By this I mean Syria, Turkey and the whole region. Even though some of the changes happening in our region have some spontaneous elements, they also contain many externally planned elements with the objective of controlling this region. What is happening now is essentially similar to what happened 100 years ago in terms of redividing the region. But 100 years ago, we accepted the division as it was drawn by Sykes and Picot when they drew the borders for you, for us, and for others in the region. This time, however, we shouldn't accept any redrawing of the region except in accordance with decisions suitable to us as peoples living in this region. We should be the people who take the decision. Unfortunately, this vision is lacking for many of the governments which accepted to act in accordance with foreign diktats, or at least to please Western countries in particular. That's why we see in the past 2 years there have been many attempts to destroy the relationship between the Turkish and Syrian people. I want to say that what we have started 12 years ago with President Bashar should continue under all circumstances. By this I mean the Turkish-Arab Brotherhood. This cannot be achieved if Syrian-Turkish relations are not good, because along with Iraq we are the closest Arab country to Turkey. So we should continue to move in this direction, and as I said, prosperity in any country will be reflected on the other. By the same token, fire in either country will also spill over into the other. Governments come and go. They do not stay forever. That's why we shouldn't allow governments and officials, especially foolish and inexperienced officials, to undermine this relationship, which should be built by us and not by any foreign power. This is my message to the Turkish people, and once again, I'm happy to receive you today.
رسالتي للشعب التركي وأنا سعيد أيضا باستقبالكم اليوم.
Çok teşekkür ederiz.
Teşekkürler Sayın Başkan.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Seyit Reis.
مرة أخرى.
Once again, thank you, and please convey my best wishes to the staff of Ulusal TV and Aydınlık newspaper.
أهلا وسهلا بكم مرة أخرى.